The Mk-7 Mod 3 arresting gear is engineered to bring a fighter jet from 150 miles per hour to a complete stop in under 2 seconds. But when this critical system failed mid-landing on the USS Harry S. Truman, the result was catastrophic. The cross-deck pendant snapped and a $70 million F-18 Super Hornet plunged off the flight deck into the Red Sea. This was not an isolated event. It marked the second Super Hornet lost from the Truman in less than 2 weeks, raising immediate alarm across the entire strike group. What hidden fault in the cross-deck pendant turned this routine landing into a near-fatal plunge? On May 6, 2025, the routine of carrier operations aboard the USS Harry S. Truman was interrupted by an event that began as a textbook landing. An F-18 Super Hornet made its approach with precision, the pilot and weapons systems officer executing every maneuver as practiced. The tailhook aligned perfectly with the cross-deck pendant, and the deck crew, trained for such moments, stood ready, monitoring every variable. Carrier landings demand absolute accuracy from all involved. But on this day, everything appeared in order. The Mk-7 Mod 3 arresting gear system, often referred to by naval aviators as the carrier's brake pedal, was primed to bring the jet from 150 miles per hour to 0 in less than 2 seconds. 4 steel cross-deck pendants stretched across the deck, each connected to the hydraulic machinery below, designed to absorb and dissipate the immense kinetic energy of a landing fighter. This system, central to the safety of every recovery, is engineered for reliability and redundancy. From the cockpit, the approach was controlled and deliberate. The Super Hornet's descent was steady, airspeed, and angle of attack within safe parameters. On deck, the crew signaled that all systems were green. The expectation was a routine trap, an aircraft snagging the cable and coming to a halt in the span of a few heartbeats. But just as the tailhook engaged, the final line of defense failed. The cross-deck pendant, a crucial component of the Mk-7 Mod 3 system, snapped under tension. The brake was instantaneous. Instead of decelerating, the Super Hornet continued its momentum, the severed steel cable recoiling violently across the flight deck. Shards of metal scattered, and the jet, still traveling at landing speed, hurtled toward the carrier's edge. In these moments, the margin for error is non-existent. The pilot and weapons systems officer reacted as trained, pulling their ejection handles as the aircraft overshot the deck. Radios blared man overboard calls, and rescue helicopters lifted off before the Super Hornet even disappeared into the Red Sea. The crew's rapid response was practiced, but never routine. Within minutes, both aviators were recovered, alive, but shaken. Their ejection had come with only seconds to spare, underscoring the unforgiving nature of carrier operations when a critical system fails. The aftermath left the deck crew and officers in disbelief. The expectation is that the arresting gear's layers of redundancy will prevent precisely this outcome. Once a jet commits to landing, there's little opportunity for a go-around. The system's reliability is the last safeguard. The loss of a $70 million aircraft was a stark reminder of what is at stake in every arrestment. But the near loss of life weighed even heavier. Immediate action followed. Senior officers ordered inspections of all remaining cross-deck pendants and reviewed maintenance logs for any signs of overlooked wear or damage. The investigation began with a close examination of the failed cable, seeking evidence of stress, fatigue, or corrosion. The question was not just how a single cable could fail, but whether systemic issues in maintenance or inspection routines had allowed a dangerous weakness to persist. Initial findings pointed to visible signs of metal fatigue at the fracture point. The harsh conditions of the Red Sea, heat, humidity, and salt exposure exacerbate wear on steel cables, demanding rigorous inspection and timely replacement. The crew examined whether procedural compliance had lapsed or if the operational tempo had forced corners to be cut in routine checks. Each detail was logged and scrutinized, as the ramifications of another failure would be severe. The incident exposed the delicate balance between operational demands and the maintenance required to keep complex systems reliable. The arresting gear's design includes multiple redundancies, yet the failure of a single cross-deck pendant brought the entire process to the brink of disaster. The Truman's crew now faced the reality that even a well-practiced routine could hide vulnerabilities beneath the surface. Up next, why did that pendant suddenly fracture? Despite multiple redundancies built into the system, the Red Sea's environment places relentless stress on every system aboard the USS Harry S. Truman. The combination of searing heat, high humidity, and persistent salt-laden air accelerates the degradation of critical hardware. Arresting cables, made to withstand enormous forces, face a cycle of expansion and contraction as temperatures fluctuate and salt corrodes exposed surfaces. The steel deck itself warps incrementally under the sun, while salt crystals work their way into microscopic imperfections. These factors, acting together, create conditions where material fatigue sets in faster than in more temperate climates. The cross-deck pendant, the steel cable stretched across the flight deck, is the last barrier between a safe landing and disaster. With each arrested landing, the cable absorbs the kinetic energy of a jet, moving at over 150 miles per hour. But despite the presence of 4 cables, a single snapped pendant during a landing at 30 knots leaves pilots with no time to react. A missed arrestment at that speed gives them no margin to attempt a go-around. When the Super Hornet's tailhook caught the cable that day, the pendant failed instantly, and there was no backup in that split second. Investigators examining the failed cable found unmistakable evidence of metal fatigue. The cable's outer surface showed subtle changes in texture, but the most telling clues were inside, microscopic fractures that had propagated over time. The investigation found that these cracks were likely undetected by routine visual inspections, which remained the standard in the fleet. Ultrasound checks, capable of revealing such internal weaknesses, were available but not used frequently enough during this deployment. The Truman's maintenance crews, operating under constant pressure, relied on established schedules and visual checks, procedures that could miss early-stage fatigue, especially under the Red Sea's punishing conditions. This environment also compounded the strain on the crew. The Truman's deployment was defined by a high operational tempo. The air wing launched and recovered aircraft at a relentless pace, responding to drone incursions and monitoring hostile missile sites along the coast. Each sortie increased the wear on the arresting gear, compressing maintenance windows and making thorough inspections more challenging. Crews worked in extreme heat, often pushing themselves one step past the safety margin, as one sailor described. In these conditions, even the most diligent teams risk missing subtle cues that signal impending failure. The investigative board's review revealed a timeline of compounding risks. Maintenance logs indicated that several cables had shown signs of wear, but the operational tempo left little time for comprehensive replacement or deeper inspection. The Red Sea's climate forced maintenance teams to conduct checks in less than ideal conditions, sometimes shortening procedures to keep pace with flight operations. Visual inspection, while quick and practical, could not reliably detect the kind of microscopic fatigue that ultimately doomed the pendant. Ultrasound testing, though available, was not mandated at intervals that accounted for the unique environmental stressors of this deployment. The failure was not the product of a single oversight or a defective component. It was the result of systemic strain, environmental extremes, relentless operational demand, and the limits of existing inspection protocols all converged. The investigation characterized the situation as a dangerous stack of small risks, all aligned at the worst possible moment. This phrase captured the reality that the Truman systems, crew, and procedures were all pushed to the edge, and when one critical link failed, the safeguards in place proved insufficient. Hydraulic engines beneath the deck, responsible for absorbing the jet's momentum, also showed signs of accelerated wear. The hot, salty air did not discriminate between exposed and protected components. Over time, it infiltrated compartments and stressed even the most robust machinery. When these hydraulics operated outside their optimal range, the load on the cross-deck pendant increased, further raising the risk of failure. The interconnectedness of these systems meant that a lapse anywhere could have cascading effects. The crash on the Truman was not the result of a single error or flaw. It was the culmination of persistent environmental assault, operational exhaustion, and a maintenance regime stretched beyond its intended limits. The incident exposed how even the most advanced safeguards can be undermined by the realities of high-stakes deployments. This single point of failure ignited a cascade of questions for the Truman's leadership. Questions we'll explore next. 2 Super Hornets worth $140 million combined went overboard in 12 days, prompting the Pentagon to demand fleet-wide arresting gear reviews. The rapid succession of losses on the USS Harry S. Truman was not seen as mere bad luck, but as a warning that a deeper problem was unfolding within the Navy's carrier operations. The pattern forced leadership to confront the possibility that current safety protocols and maintenance cycles were no longer keeping pace with the realities of high-tempo deployments in contested waters. The Truman's deployment had already been marked by relentless operational demands, with the carrier group tasked to monitor missile threats, intercept drones, and maintain a constant state of readiness in the Red Sea. The loss of 2 aircraft in such a short period triggered emergency meetings at the highest levels. The Navy's response went beyond routine investigation. Immediate orders went out for comprehensive inspections of arresting systems across the carrier fleet. The possibility of rotating the Truman out of high-threat operations, or even temporarily relieving the strike group, was actively discussed. These considerations underscored just how disruptive the incidents had become, not only to the Truman's mission, but to the Navy's global force posture. As investigators worked through the aftermath, their focus shifted from the mechanical failure itself to the broader ecosystem that allowed the failure to occur. Early findings highlighted lapses in inspection protocols and maintenance scheduling, but also the cumulative effect of operational overuse. The arresting cable, officially the cross-deck pendant, had been pushed beyond its intended maintenance threshold, a decision shaped by the need to keep sorties flowing and missions on track. The investigation revealed that reliance on visual inspections, rather than more advanced diagnostic tools like ultrasound, left internal fractures undetected. The Navy's established routines, effective in less demanding environments, proved inadequate against the Red Sea's relentless heat and salt and the relentless pace of operations. The consequences extended well beyond the technical. On board the Truman, the mood shifted palpably. Crew members who had trained for years to trust the ship's safety systems found themselves questioning that trust. One sailor admitted, "When the wire snaps twice, you start asking, will the next landing kill us?" The psychological weight of back-to-back failures was not lost on the deck teams or the pilots. Each landing became a test of nerve, and the sense of security that underpinned daily operations began to erode. The emotional fallout was compounded by the realization that near misses could easily become tragedies, under only slightly different circumstances. The Navy's leadership recognized the urgency of restoring confidence, both within the ranks and in the eyes of the public. Emergency reviews of safety protocols were paired with discussions about accelerated maintenance schedules and possible replacement of critical arresting gear. The idea of pulling the Truman from its high-threat station, even temporarily, was weighed against the strategic risks of reducing presence in a region already under heightened tension. Meanwhile, rumors circulated about whether the strike group might receive relief sooner than planned. These actions reflected a broader acknowledgement. The Navy could not afford to ignore systemic weaknesses, especially when adversaries were watching for any sign of vulnerability. Externally, the incidents drew attention from policymakers and the public, raising questions about the Navy's ability to sustain operations in contested environments. The loss of 2 advanced jets in less than 2 weeks became a focal point for debates on readiness and resilience. The Truman setbacks challenged the image of unshakable American power projection, especially as threats from Iran and Houthi rebels continued to escalate. For the Pentagon, the incidents were not only a technical failure, but a strategic signal, one that forced a reckoning with the cost of maintaining forward presence under constant strain. Within the carrier's steel corridors, the aftermath left no one untouched. Surviving aviators and deck crews carried the knowledge that the margin for error had narrowed to a razor's edge. Each day on station brought new pressure, and each landing was shadowed by the memory of what had gone wrong. The Navy's immediate actions, fleet-wide inspections, emergency maintenance, and consideration of operational relief, were necessary. But the deeper challenge remained: how to rebuild trust in systems designed to protect lives and maintain operational dominance. With the region on high alert and tensions rising, can the Navy afford to keep pushing these systems past their limits? In the aftermath of the Super Hornet crash on the USS Harry S. Truman, the Navy confronted a hard reality. The incident resulted from a convergence of 3 root causes: material fatigue in the arresting cable, lapses in inspection protocols, and relentless operational demands. Each factor played a critical role. The failed cable had endured repeated high-speed landings, accumulating microscopic fractures accelerated by the Red Sea's heat, humidity, and salt. Routine visual inspections, while conducted regularly, missed these internal faults. Ultrasound testing equipment was available on the ship, but its use was infrequent, and critical signs of degradation went undetected. At the same time, the Truman's crew faced a punishing sortie rate, tasked with monitoring drone activity and missile threats along the coast, which pushed both personnel and equipment past their intended limits. The investigation revealed that the cable's failure was not simply mechanical, but systemic. The operational tempo left little room for thorough maintenance or comprehensive diagnostic checks. Maintenance teams worked long hours under extreme conditions, often stretching inspection intervals to keep up with mission requirements. These practices, while understandable given the urgency of the Truman's deployment, eroded safety margins. The result was a situation in which minor oversights and delayed maintenance allowed a critical weakness to grow unnoticed until it reached a breaking point. In response, the Navy moved quickly to implement corrective measures. Emergency inspections swept through the fleet, with particular attention paid to arresting gear systems on every carrier. 2 decisive policy changes followed. Mandated ultrasonic cable checks increased by 300% across all deployed carriers, and revised maintenance protocols required arresting cable replacements to occur 20% earlier than previous thresholds. These actions reflected a clear shift in priorities, emphasizing early detection and prevention over operational convenience. The changes were not limited to hardware. Flight deck crews received updated training focused on recognizing subtle warning signs, and maintenance teams adopted more rigorous documentation and oversight of gear condition. Leadership also faced difficult decisions about force posture in a volatile region. The possibility of temporarily rotating in another carrier to relieve the Truman was considered but ultimately set aside, as commanders feared that any reduction in presence would signal vulnerability to adversaries, particularly amid ongoing Houthi and Iranian missile threats. This tension underscored the broader challenge: maintaining credibility and deterrence while ensuring that safety standards were never compromised by the pressures of continuous deployment. The Navy's review did not stop at technical fixes. The incident became a case study in the dangers of operating at the edge of system capabilities. Internal discussions focused on the need for a culture of continuous improvement, where lessons from failures are rapidly translated into new policies and procedures. The Navy recognized that rebuilding trust in the arresting gear and in the routines of carrier aviation would require more than new checklists or equipment upgrades. It demanded a renewed commitment to transparency, accountability, and the well-being of the crew. For the pilots and deck teams, the impact was immediate and personal. The crash shattered assumptions about the infallibility of carrier systems. Pilots now approached each landing with heightened caution, aware that the margin for error had narrowed. Maintenance crews carried out inspections with a new sense of urgency, knowing that the smallest oversight could have catastrophic consequences. Commanders worked to restore morale by emphasizing the improvements underway. Yet the memory of what happened on the Truman lingered. For pilots now asking, "Will the wire hold?" every landing became a stark reminder that trust isn't rebuilt overnight. The lessons from this incident extend beyond technical upgrades or policy changes. They reveal the true cost of sustained operations in contested waters, a cost measured not only in equipment and readiness, but in the confidence of those who serve. The Navy's efforts to address the root causes of the failure are ongoing, shaped by the understanding that even the most advanced systems can falter under relentless strain. The path forward will require vigilance, adaptation, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about the limits of technology and the demands placed on those who operate it. The near miss on May 6th and the earlier loss on April 28th aboard the USS Harry S. Truman exposed the Navy's vulnerability when operational demands pushed systems and crews to their limits. These incidents were not isolated. They revealed a pattern, highlighting how even advanced arresting gear and experienced personnel can be stretched to the breaking point under sustained pressure in contested waters. This isn't just about one cable or one ship. It's about the Navy's ability to sustain high-stakes operations under fire, where every system must perform flawlessly. If you found this breakdown illuminating, share your take on how the Navy can rebuild trust in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into military tech and operations. With carrier deployments only growing more frequent, how much wear can our systems and our people truly endure?